Welcome to Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and POWs, or prisoners of war, suffered tremendous bouts of starvation and mistreatment at the hands of their captors in the Civil War. Andersonville Prison and Camp Douglas stand out as the two most infamous prisons, but in this video I want to talk about Libby Prison. It was a Confederate military prison in Richmond, Virginia. The building itself was 3 stories high in front and 4 stories high in the rear, containing 6 rooms excluding the cellar. Each room was about 105 feet by 45 feet. Before the war, it was used by its owner, Mr. Libby, as a tobacco warehouse. After the Battle of Bull Run, it was used as a prison, and it continued to be used as a prison until the close of the war. At times, there were as many as 1,200 prisoners confined there, most of them being federal officers. One of the inmates was Colonel Frederick Bartleson. He was born in Cincinnati, Ohio on November 10th, 1833. After graduating law school, he moved to Illinois to practice law at the age of 21. At 22, he became the area's district attorney. When the war broke out, he was the very first man to enlist in Will County, and was quickly elected to captain of his company. The first regiment he belonged to was the 20th Illinois. He fought at Fort Donelson and at Shiloh, where he was struck in the left arm, resulting in its amputation. He would return to service later that year to take part in the Battle of Stones River, leading the 100th Illinois as a colonel. At the Battle of Chickamauga, he would be captured and sent to Libby Prison, where he would keep a journal and write letters to his wife. These are his letters from Libby Prison. January 30th, 1864. This morning, as I was down in the dining room with many others, as usual for the purpose of exercise and fresh air, the inspector of this prison, followed by a guard with his gun, walked the stairs leading to our rooms above. No attention was paid to it, it being supposed to be merely a new regulation in regard to sick call. In a moment more guards came thronging in, and everybody in the room, of whom some were cooking, some washing, some walking, and some like myself reading in the morning papers, was ordered to fall into 2 ranks. For what, no one knew. It was by Major Turner's, the commandant's orders. The order was to keep us in the manor all day. We were told we must not walk, nor go near the stoves to warm, nor talk, and we must keep our position to the front. To be sure, we had had no breakfast, and had been guilty of nothing that we knew of, but that was the order. In a few moments the inspector condescended to inform us of the reason, of which I presume he did not know before. He said he was informed by the commandant of the prison that some prisoners or persons had insulted the guard, and therefore all those on that floor were to be punished. Although there is a difficulty in discovering who the real perpetrators of any given offense are, yet there is a manifest injustice in punishing all for the offense of a few. However, let those who have experience in the management of military prisons decide that point. It does not lessen the anger of a man upon whom the punishment is unjustly visited. We would probably have been compelled to remain there all day had not another scene appeared, which eclipsed and put an end to the one in which we were actors. After 2 or 3 hours, in came the clerk of the prison, followed by more guards. Forming 4 ranks was the order, and we knew it betokened roll call. For what, we wonder? Now the resolutions of last night have been carried into effect. A galley slave is loose. A number of them, perhaps. The roll must be called to determine that. But after an effort to count us there, it is abandoned, and we are all ordered upstairs. All must go into East Room, and we pass out, one by one as our names are called. After this, we go to our respective rooms. Rumors then began to fly thick and fast. They differ as to the number who have escaped. Those who have escaped have boldly walked by the guard. One passes out by the front door, brushing 2 or 3 officials in his exit. Another goes by the way of the back door. The guard is suspicious and commands him to halt. No attention paid to the command. The corporal of the guard is called. The officials of the prison hear the cry and gather in the knot around the door. 2 men are hurriedly sent off to arrest a man in a United States blue overcoat seen walking some distance up the street. Off they dash in full pursuit, passing on their way a citizen who is leisurely walking on the pavement and brushing by him. The man in the overcoat is rudely and roughly seized, hurried back to the prison, but he is a citizen of Richmond, and the citizen they brushed by was the escaped federal officer. Another makes his escape by the same back door, even after his predecessor had awakened the suspicion of the guard. No use to stop him. He is but a workman, although we think his name is Carruthers, and that he is a federal officer. Others too are missing from roll call, but no one seems to know whether they have escaped or not. Again, roll call. The first has been unsatisfactory. Again to the east room, this time passing out without calling by name. The count does not come out as it should, nor does it correspond with the former. February 5th, 1864. If a few thousand men can suffer in southern prisons, by reason of the scarcity within the southern lines and the animosity of the Confederates, in how much greater ratio will prisoners suffer when they are increased 4, 5, or 6-fold? The additional number will not fare so well as the present number do. Both old fish and fresh fish will suffer more. Prisoners will be taken on both sides if the war goes on. The rebel power has yet large armies, large enough to take many more prisoners, especially in a vigorous campaign such as the coming one gives proof of being. The suffering of prisoners will then be terrible. Retaliation will not help the matter. It will be a great difficulty to the rebels to feed them properly, even if solicitous to do so. Public sentiment in the North will be more apt to act on the government as a pressure to exchange on almost any terms, rather than a pressure to enforce retaliation. There will be sympathizers enough to denounce the government for its cruelty, while at the same time affecting to doubt the veracity of reports as to the condition of our prisoners. You may retaliate by hanging one man for another, or placing in solitary confinement one man for another. But how retaliate justly in matters of food? One day the Confederate government is out of meat. Another day it is out of rice, and occasionally it may have no food at all. Are we to have a bill of fare transmitted by flag of truce daily for the information of our government? And if the ship fails to make connection at a proper time, and is discovered too late that some poor devil of a Confederate has eaten or drunk more than is warranted, must the stomach pump be resorted to, or a purgative be administered to make him disgorge? The truth is, the Confederate government will have the advantage of us in this respect, as they have in many others. Growing out of means condition of the two parties, our wealth and supremacy are in the respect our weakness. They have had the advantage in paroles according to the previous agreement, by which of their partisan rangers making excursions into our lines, aided by the sympathizers of the vicinity. It was our misfortune and mistake that we did not foresee it in time and take the necessary steps in the early days of exchange for lessening or obviating the difficulty and inequality. February 9th, 1864. The apprehensions of the rebel newspapers seem to have taken the shape of a belief that the recent demonstrations on the peninsula signify the establishing of our lines nearer to Richmond, with a view of future operations. The rumors in regard to Judge Ould report unfavorable to exchange from his representations. The boxes were not distributed today, but merely some articles of a perishable nature, and some which have perished already, being entirely spoiled. Many of the articles likewise are missing, have undoubtedly been pilfered. A meeting has been called by some indignant ones tonight to consider the propriety of prisoners refusing to receive boxes at all in such a worthless condition. Everything in the way of eatables is rapidly diminishing, and very soon the majority of prisons will be reduced to a meager fare of Confederate rations. Statesmanship must deal with men as they are, not as they ought to be. Whoever attempts to thrust down the throats of a people that which their mental and moral stomachs reject will be the occasion and instrument of more or less discontent. According as the diet is more or less unpalatable, it may beget indignant murmurs or rebellion. February 13, 1864. Letters from home. At this cry in Libby Prison, the whole building is in commotion, men rushing, tumbling over one another. The dull monotony of our life is broken. If there is a place where news from those we love is doubly welcome, here is the place. The narrow circuit in which our energies are confined, the dull routine, the same today, yesterday, and forever, the inevitable groove into which conversation must ourselves run, tend to make news from the outside world, and particularly from those who are dear to us, an event of unusual welcome. Today, 2 letters, one from Kate and one from one of my soldiers who was taken prisoner, wounded, and exchanged. No distribution of boxes yet, and provisions becoming low. No meat issued today. Officers continue to be brought in until the number has probably reached 40. Those who have been in the cells for a few days are released to make way for later arrivals. February 18th, 1864, a ration and a half of bread and a ration of meat issued today. Weather intensely cold. The inmates of Libby Prison increased by the arrival of Brigadier General Scammers and his 2 aides, captured on a boat in the Kanawha River. One of his aides was a little tipsy, and a great many little jokes were perpetrated on him. He was introduced to a fellow dressed in most outlandish style for the occasion, who he was given to understand was commissary of the building. The commissary inquired if he would prefer a mess of cornbread or wheat bread. He unhesitatingly accepted the latter. He was promised that 6 blankets and a box of provisions would be forthcoming the next day, but little respect to one's feelings is shown here by many, who would ask the general if he had many greenbacks, and a great many other questions which are understood to be matters of a joke to old fish. Undoubtedly, if the commander-in-chief of our armies were unfortunate enough to be brought here, there are many here who would take a cruel delight in offending his dignity and making him feel his position. But the general was a classmate of General Winder's, and has been treated by the authority far better than anyone else. General Dow, who kindly bustled about previous to his arrival, endeavoring to procure blankets for him to make himself more comfortable, on his advent here must have felt the contrast in his own position, when during the day a cot with pillow, blanket, and sheets was brought in by 2 Confederate soldiers. March 7th, 1864. I no longer write this in prison. This day my name was called, and I was among the lucky ones. I did not know it until an hour before I went. I have since learned that my name was sent and myself asked for. Major Mulford, assistant commander, told me on the boat that Colonel Schaffer, Butler's chief of staff, was very anxious about me and said he would bring me at all events. We were searched, but it was a mere matter of form. At last we started, and the windows of the prisons were crowded with heads. For my part, I felt sad all the way. After walking about 3/4 of a mile, we took the little ship Schultz, and after reaching City Point were transferred to our own ship, on which we remained until reaching Annapolis. The men down below kept up a chattering all night, singing, shouting, repeating the cries and slang words of the prison, as if to convince themselves they were really out of the prison. The officers were no more composed. We could not sleep, and I got up after going to bed. Upon his release from prison, he went back home, and the area cheered for his bravery and offered him votes for political office. But he chose to return to the battlefield. When asked why, he stated, "The question is still unsettled. Whether we are to have another Congress or country, and it can only be settled by the success of our armies. And until it is settled, I want no nomination, no office but the one I now hold. And I shall return to my post and give my life, if need be, to secure us in a free government." He would travel by train to Georgia and then walk 30 miles in the Georgia heat to his regiment. A letter from the surgeon of the regiment recounts what happened next. Headquarters 180th Illinois in the field near Marietta, Georgia, June 25th, 1864. Before this reaches you, the sad news of the death of our gallant and noble Colonel Bartleson will have been received. This time the news is too true. Thursday, June 23rd in the morning, he went out as a division officer of the day, being in charge of the skirmish line. The forenoon was very quiet, and he came in about 1 o'clock to the regiment headquarters to dinner. The position of the officer of pickets on the skirmish line in such times as these is one of great danger, and we had all hoped that that day all would be quiet. But about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, orders were sent around which plainly indicated to us that something in the way of offensive operations was to be done. The artillery opened all along the line for several moments, and the lines were advanced, the skirmish line advancing and one brigade moving on to their support. The colonel was killed soon after the commencement of the advance. The left of the line did not advance as fast as the rest, and the colonel rode out to spur them on. There was a point there which was plainly in view of the rebel line, and they fired at every one passing by that opening. The rebel ball struck the colonel on the right side, passing through the body and coming out on the left side. His death was probably almost instantaneous. The stretcher bearers of the 57th Indiana, which regiment was on the skirmish line, saw him fall and went to him, and finding him dead, they carried the body back to a barn in the rear of the old line, and sent us word of the occurrence. We immediately sent out our own stretcher bearers and had his body brought in. We had hoped that this report was like the many others we have had before, but soon the fact was too plainly proved. His body was brought back, lifeless. I have seen many officers and men killed on the field, but never saw one whose death seemed to strike such a blow to everyone as did his. Generals Newton, Wagner, and Harker were nearby and came up. The regiment passed in review to take the last look at the one they loved and honored. H.T. Woodruff, Surgeon, 100th Illinois. Thank you all so much for watching. I thought highlighting this brave soldier's story was imperative. He exemplified bravery and loyalty. He was undaunted by the possibility of death and stuck to his principles and convictions. But keep in mind, his is just one of millions of Civil War stories, many of whom we will never know. Thank you. Please share the videos to spread the word about the channel, and I'll see you next time.